Zlatko, can you say few words that we will understand whether we have a good sound?
Excellent. I hope you hear me, Ehud.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good. Nathalie, hi. Paul, great. I see you. Fariz is on iPhone. Good. Chiril, hi. How are you? And of course, Mr. Secretary General Roshan. You are the most serious one, of course. You guys from Azerbaijan are the most serious ones. You have ties. You know, you are, which is okay. I mean, you are the most serious among all of us. So, having in mind, Roshan, how great events you hosted the last 3 days, it looks like you are really coming to the end, and hope we will do some good things today in this panel, as the previous 3 were great. And then in the afternoon, we close up and see how do we do liftoff in post-corona time. When shall we start?
I think we are already live on Facebook.
Yeah. We are already on Facebook. Great. Roshan, I don't hear you. Roshan, I see you opening your mouth, but I don't hear you. You are muted.
Myself, you know that you can just start.
Yeah, we can. Okay. Okay. Is it okay? Am I online? Yes. Good. Okay. So thank you very much for joining this 4th closing session. We had previous, after opening ceremony, we had the 3 excellent sessions in first 3 days, and I hope that some of you were watching some of them. It was very interesting events that we had before us. The first one was going beyond globalization, talking about multilateralism, about nationalism rising versus multilateralism, and all those problems that current multilateralism that is under attack is facing too. The second one was basically speaking about social issues related in post-corona time, and it's more about education, about equality, about issues that are dealing with social effects of the post-corona era that we are just entering. And of course, the third one was maybe we could call it transition to peace, because the world is obviously not leaving the problems that we had before corona, just the new ones were added. And this one is supposed to be about economy. So if the 3 first sessions were about what we should do, now we should talk about who's going to pay for it. And are we going to be able to pay it without destroying ourselves by growing in a wrong direction? And of course, our overall framework is Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals that are more and more seen as the plan that has no alternative. And the question is how we should speed it up. So if you don't mind, I wouldn't do a long introduction just to set the stage. It would be good if we could do 2 or maybe 3 rounds of discussion, so that my suggestion is that we start with the 3 to 5 minutes. When I'm saying 3 to 5 minutes, I really think that we should do 6 to 5 minutes. Roshan has sometimes idea that I should say that we should speak 2 to 3 minutes in order to finish in 5. But I mean, since we all know each other so well, I think it's better to say that we should do 3 to 5 minutes in order to have a second and hopefully 3rd round. So if you prepared something in an area of 10 or 12 minutes, just do first 5 minutes first, and then pretend that when we are talking in the future is something which is just a reflection of what we talked about, having in mind that you already thought over about it. So if there is any other suggestions, I would ask you that we start in order that was planned before. I know that some of you have previous defined engagements. We're supposed to be finished by 11:30, but knowing that every session broke 1.5 hour time limit, I have no doubt that we will end a little bit later than an hour and a half. But in any way, Ehud, I would like you to start and lift off, and then we will see how we're going in the right direction to the moon, and hopefully when we get to the moon, they will get back as well. So Ehud, you are the one that will be liftoff of our today's 4th session.
Thank you. I'm happy and glad and proud to appear on the same stage with all of you. I think that UN 75th anniversary is a good cause to celebrate a lot of achievements, including in the collaboration and cooperation on economic issue. We have seen the last generation, the globalization and the establishment of the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO and trade agreement and so on, which dramatically changed the life of probably 1/3 of humanity. But I think that under the shadow of the COVID-19, we have a real reason to worry. The world is heading probably toward a deep recession, even probably in some countries a full depression. And there is a paradox which emerges here. We all know that the COVID-19 in a way emphasizes the fact that the global challenges are real, and basically the real challenges to humanity are all global. The climate change, pandemics which somehow are related to climate change, sustainability of our very complicated international community. The challenge of terror is global. The challenge of nuclear proliferation is global. Poverty is global. Corruption is global. And on the other hand, politics is always local. And you would expect that the challenge of COVID-19 will be will give a great tailwind to those who want to promote the global cooperation, the understanding that we are facing, for better or worse, the consequences of what we are doing together. And somehow it seems to be the opposite, at least for the time being, probably suffering from wave of ultra-nationalist, inward-looking, populist political leadership in many of the advanced countries on earth. It seems that the post-corona impact on the politics and economic landscape will be the opposite, namely to limit things, to cause nations to look more and more inward to tariffs, to trade wars and so on. At the core of it, I see the geostrategic rivalry, which emerges more and more so between the United States and China, partly out of internal politics, but from genuine conflict as well. And we are probably heading toward the trade wars. We are probably heading into technology. Look at the G5 story, Huawei and so on. And the real risk is that the world will be pushed toward a very damaging division into two camps. That America will demand from its supporters to stand fully behind it. The Chinese will respond in the same. There is no vacuum, and we can find ourselves in a set of geostrategic elements which will push down the very possibility of international cooperation. I think, looking at what should be done, I think that a lot of effort should be invested by smaller players, medium and small-sized players, to exert their limited influence on two big powers, not even to define each other as enemies, but at most as a political rival, economic rival. That's all okay, but not in terms of zero-sum games, which are seemingly developing as we are talking. For the longer period, I would discuss how to make the UN role in world economy even more more active. How to find a way to establish a kind of United Nations Economic and Sustainability Security Council, made not from 5 members, but to add at least, I would say, India, Germany, Japan, Brazil, probably Indonesia, make a group of 10 and have a membership for the smallest country on earth, and try to tackle the real challenge of this new economic Cold War that could emerge, hopefully not deteriorating into something worse between China and the US. This is the major threat on our horizon, both politically, for peace, and for sure for the economy.
Well, thank you, Ehud. I mean, I like your very first point that challenges are global and we are trying to sort them out with local politics and local solutions. And by definition, even from the logical point of view, the most complex methodological apparatus, which is called sense, makes sense. And we are sometimes losing common sense when we are dealing with such a complex problems. We are, I think that your point about challenges being global and the solutions and policies have to be global as well, especially pointing out our current problem, which is China-USA relations. I think it's great to continue with our today's dialogue. I think, Chiril, you are the next one on the line. I see you are muted, and I welcome you to this online Baku forum that we are trying to somehow maintain in this physical distance, but socially closer than ever come. So, Chiril, please.
Far but close. Thank you. I would like, first of all, to thank to all the participants and to congratulate the organizers with nice event during these days. During this period of time, we had ourselves and with all the people around us, we had many questions. Some of the questions are related to how this period or how this crisis, I would call it, will end. What would be the world after this period of time, and how to survive during this period of time in order to face the new reality when that is going to happen. Ehud mentioned about the globalization, and all of us, all the world, managed to see the situation when this so-called globality in one day or in a very short period of time transformed into a very local. And when I'm saying very local, I mean very local. For big part of the population of the world, this very local became some tens maybe square meters, meaning their houses or their apartments where they were living. The economy is definitely suffering big times. I'm sure the world is not going to change over the night. It will take some time. But what I think is that we, everybody, all over the world, the countries, we have to continue to develop the existing economical and political relationship. And these economical and political relationships, they have to be based on free global market integration, on peace, of course, on protecting and having in mind as a base the minority rights, the individual freedom, and the freedom of choice, of course. All these elements that I'm talking about, they are related to each other, and if we progress in one of this area, the other areas will progress as well. It is known that the global economical integration is increasing in the same time the individual freedom of consumers or of the customers at the end of the day. In the same time, we have to be very cautious as people, as individuals, and as countries as well. we should be cautious for ourselves, for our health, but we should be very cautious about the environment, about the place we are living. One of the lessons, I would say, that COVID-19 showed us is that we have and we must decrease the pollution. Me, as Chiril Gaburici, I'm a strong believer in renewable energy. And I think many countries in the medium or maybe short run, I would say they have to be ready. They have to invest, they have to increase their, let's say, they have to increase their independence from other countries in this specific area. When I'm talking about energy, and that's about sustainability, and that gives more independence to the country. I would say the country like Moldova and many other countries that are very dependent from in this specific area. So at all, I think we have to be cautious about what we do, about how we do, and we have to be cautious and we have to care about the environment. And in this perspective, there are many things to be done. I know there are nice, good examples, and there are countries that miss this, and I think we have to get to help each other in a way so we move forward all together.
Thank you. Thank you, Chiril. Without commenting everyone, I will just use my opportunity to share your thoughts with you and my thoughts about this reflection, what you said later on after we finish this first round. So Nathalie, hi. I hope you will unmute yourself and just go. Do you hear me, Nathalie? You are muted. Oh.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, no, good. Okay, great.
It's very hot. So, well, first of all, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen on Facebook, it is my pleasure and honor to be speaking today on shared future and responsibility as a businesswoman, but as well as an entrepreneur working on sustainability. I would like to extend my heartfelt thank you to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center and to the Marianna Vardinoyannis Foundation for organizing this inspiring session on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. So let me start first by saying that this virus knows no national boundaries. In today's world, viruses, greenhouse gases, or economic inequalities, they will know no borders. While the pandemic has confirmed the interdependence of the world's populations, it reminds us that the only lasting responses to these challenges are achieved on a multilateral scale. Indeed, in 2020, the economy cannot stand independent from the rest of the world. Economic challenges are deeply linked to environmental and social issues, we just mentioned it, both at a local and a global scale. The global economy has been tested and it is in need of reinvention. That should include sustainability. The economy needs to think local while being global, capitalizing on coalitions between states, businesses, and the civil society. In order to break the economic, ecological, and social deadlocks, initiatives must be brought into line at an international level. This year's postponement of international meetings on climate and biodiversity should strengthen the determination of leaders to commit themselves in order to keep the momentum going. This crisis has also reshuffled the cards towards a more regionalized globalization, where business leaders are more than ever expected to reinvest locally in order to address the social, economic, and environmental impacts exposed by the pandemic. Starting from large corporations, the challenge for the world is to create a new path to fully integrate locally while generating value for the local ecosystems, the communities, the SMEs, and the micro enterprises. Such a network, such an environment will enable SMEs to effectively join this movement and commit themselves to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations agenda. The success of a sustainable economic transition will take place at a local level, driven by a regionalized globalization. But the economy needs to integrate the global perspective as well, of course. In the face of the global pandemic, the international structures that prevailed for 75 years, embodied by the United Nations General Assembly, are challenged by all sides. We just mentioned it. However, only the United Nations 2030 agenda makes it possible to address the matters, allowing us to move toward a better and sustainable future. None of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals will be achieved without combining the governments, private sector, and the civil society. Therefore, it is essential to energize the public debate. This is what we are doing too this morning. We need to define new forms of economic cooperation designed to function in our current unsettled geopolitical climate. But no sustainable growth, economic growth, is possible without the full commitment of the private sector. Only global public-private partnerships will pave the road to achieve a sustainable New Deal. And more than ever, the future of our economy relies on the strategic coalitions between the state, public institutions, the civil society, and the private sector, not only at a regional scale, but at the global scale as well. Thank you very much, and I look forward to exchanging with you on future direction of the economy.
Thank you, Nathalie. I mean, I will come back with us sort of for a second round, but for that, let me continue what the order that we already have. George just joined us, which is hi, George. So good to see you someplace in Athens or wherever. I'm not in Sarajevo, I'm on the Adriatic coast in Istria Peninsula in Rovinj, so I'm enjoying some weather like you, George, probably. So, but before that, I would ask Fariz to take the floor, and I'm very eager to see if Fariz, your thoughts about our today's topic. So please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to be part of this panel, and I would like to thank Nizami Ganjavi Center for this opportunity. I am representing educational institution. I work for ADA University in Baku. So, of course, for me, it's a great honor to be part of these policy discussions and to give a perspective from the side of university, from the community of academia. Yes, I agree with the speakers. We are living in unprecedented times, and not only because of pandemic and other risks, but also because of unique attacks on multilateralism. We are experiencing attacks on multilateral institutions. We are experiencing lack of trust in these institutions. And specifically, since our panel is about economy, we see more and more attacks on multilateral trade institutions, such as World Trade Organization, World Bank, IMF. We see more and more efforts for protectionism. We see rising tariffs, rising barriers to free trade, and all of these, of course, making it very difficult for young nations like Azerbaijan to integrate into global trade. I would like to specifically say that we in Azerbaijan are now facing three particular challenges when it comes to economy, and finish with one recommendation how we can manage these challenges. First challenge is, of course, global drop in the world prices for oil. This is a very big impact on Azerbaijan's budget, but not only in Azerbaijan. I think it will have profound impact on Russia's budget, on Iran's budget, on Saudi Arabia's budget. I think that these countries will have more and more challenges when it comes to revenues in the next few years, as we see more and more decrease of oil demand in the world. So consequently, of course, there will be some geopolitical and political shifts in the region as well. But when it comes to Azerbaijan, I think that this will create a lot of pressure on services, social services, because oil and gas revenues fill most of the budget in the country. And therefore, for government, it is very important to diversify economy and to create non-oil sector, which will also be able to pay for social services. Second real problem right now that we are experiencing is the closed borders. Azerbaijan is positioning itself as a hub for Central Asia Caucasus when it comes to trade, connectivity, transport, East-West corridor, South-North corridor. These are important projects, regional projects, and Azerbaijan is gaining a lot of dividends from these projects. But because of the closed borders, we see more and more obstacles and barriers to the development of transport corridors and to development of the regional infrastructure, regional connectivity infrastructure. And finally, the third problem that we see or challenge that we experience is that because of the closed borders, most of the countries in the region, they have to look for their own resources to solve their problems. And there's very little focus given to regional cooperation and regional integration, particularly when it comes to South Caucasus and Central Asia. Not only political problems hinder this regional integration, but now we have also the problem of closed borders. Especially when it comes to such a promising project like One Belt, One Road project, which is initiated by China, but it has a big impact on Central Asia and Caucasus region as well. I would like to wrap up by saying that all these challenges, all these issues are only possible to be resolved by reforms inside of the country, as well as the active cooperation among the international stakeholders. Azerbaijani government realizes the importance of reforms. We have now very reform-minded cabinet of ministers, which is very much looking towards eliminating barriers to free trade, diminishing barriers to entrepreneurship, making it easy for business climate to prosper, reducing requirements for licensing and regulations. So I hope that these reforms and these initiatives will foster the development of non-oil sector and will help Azerbaijani government to also pay for social services as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to participate in Q&A session.
Thank you, Fariz, very much. Alex Kwasniewski is joining us very shortly, and of course, now that's the reason I was called George, you now to take the floor, and now we have like 4 old Europeans coming in the picture. George, Alex, and Paul is here as hardcore European for a long time ago, and of course, it looks like Peter Roman is on his way because Romania joined the European Union last out of all of your 4 guys that are in front of us. So, George, and I would like to ask, of course, to have you on whatever you are prepared to say, but as an introduction to this, I would like to have some of your thoughts for something, because we are talking about Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals and economy. European Union just a few months ago launched that COVID made a little disruption about it, this Green European deal, Green Europe deal, that is talking about, and Nathalie, I'm sure that you will join us later on that issue from your perspective as well. But European Union is, with Green Deal, it is giving us a great chance for the neighborhood policy that we hit the Black Sea area, Mediterranean and Western Balkan, those 3 areas that are in different package in sense of enlargement. But the Green Deal is giving us a chance to somehow leapfrog and be one logical entity as European Union, what is today, and what neighborhood countries are in Western Balkan, because European Green Deal is not going to be green substantially if someone has an idea to ask Schengen visas for green economy. So this is maybe one of the ways to jump in with enlargement, to get into the, let's say, another way of logical enlargement and making us together, geographically speaking, more green. So I'm not saying that you should not say what you prepared of, but I'm asking for hardcore Europeans to take a little, let's say, snapshot in a future of European Green Deal, and us be part of Green Deal. Us in Azerbaijan, us in Bosnia and Montenegro, us in Middle East and Mediterranean, how to work together because as Nathalie said, COVID doesn't know borders, and green economy also does not know about borders and about our divisions. So maybe this is one of the issues that we should ask our European friends to say a few words about it in the first round as well. George, please.
Thank
I will
you.
say the floor is yours, but the screen is yours.
Yes, well, hello to everyone. I wish you all best health. Zlatko, thank you very much. You have put very important points, and the European Union is I think crucial in what it's going to do. I'll make 2 points to get to the European Union and the Green Deal. First of all, Ehud said earlier that the globe must work together. We do need leadership, but one thing the pandemic has done is that for the first time in human history, we all have experienced pretty much at the same time the same emotions, same pictures, same fears, same hopes, same shock sometimes, you know, the tears when we see people, you know, coming out of the hospital. This is something which leaders should be able to use as a uniting force, one for cooperation around the world. Secondly, there is pressure on leaders to go back to normal. When you have uncertainty, this is the pressure on leaders. Go back to normal. However, we cannot go back to normal because, I believe, because the past normal was not the normal we need. It created and has created many problems, such as inequities, climate crisis, and so on. So we need a huge transformation, a transition. And the European Union has decided, luckily, that the short-term measures, the immediate short-term measures, and here I want to say that, Zlatko, yes, when I was in the presidency in 2003, we pushed the idea of this neighborhood policy, but also now, I myself and others have said that the Western Balkans, possibly not yet, quite a few years before you become members, should be part of the measures to help fight the COVID-19. The short-term measures should be linked to the medium and long-term policies, and that is the Green Deal. Of course, what those long-term policies will be is still a debate, but we do know some general directions. But I will give you my view of what I think Europe must do, and this is going to be a political discussion and fight. It's not simple. These issues are not simply technical. Health. There are inequities in health. We need to reimagine from therapy to prevention, create robust health systems. This is part of the Green Deal and the money that will be given from the European Union. A transformation, and health, in fact, unites us. Our neighbors' health is directly connected to our health, as you said. Food chain, poverty and obesity, we have seen how this is detrimental to health. It also has degraded the environment. It's linked with sustainability. We must reimagine the use of resources, agriculture, water, fisheries, how we produce for a healthier life and healthier environment, and transform our food industry. 3, energy, as said earlier, transformation. But I would say not simply renewables, not simply a healthy environment, but also empowering our citizens, a slogan of the 60s, power to the people. Digital economy, we are using it now. We have moved into this 4th industrial revolution. However, there is good and bad use of technology. We also see it used for authoritarian means, tracking political opponents and so on. And of course, there is huge concentration of wealth in the digital industry. Education, as said earlier, crucial. We need to use it to fight inequality, train throughout life, but today we need it to use to create democratic and citizen participation, to be resilient for today's and future challenges. And finally, global cooperation, as was said earlier, we see it an attack on the global institutions. We need to strengthen global institutions. Antonio Guterres, of course, has called for a global truce. I will then get just two, 3 points on finance and the European Union. The EU can be an example of what was said earlier by Mrs. de Gaulle, Nathalie. It can be a regional example of cooperation which is needed at the global level, of course. Even more, the European Union, I think, is of great importance. We are now moving into something very new, common borrowing, debt relief, investment at the EU level for our member states in helping unemployment and helping companies survive. And as you said, in the Green Deal with all these areas of health, education, social services, and citizen participation. There will be a move, I think, in two directions. More self-reliance in some areas, such as I think in agriculture, but then there will be other areas where we need more cooperation. I call it the commonwealth areas, whether it's in education, environment, health, and so on. How will we finance this? We are thinking of own resources. At this point, the EU member states put from their budget into the EU budget, but that's highly controversial. So we're thinking of global taxes or European taxes. This may impact not only Europe, but also other parts of the world. Greenhouse gas taxes, a wealth tax, which Piketty has talked about, transaction taxes, that's usually was called in the past the Tobin tax, fighting tax havens and tax competition where there's a lot of money which is not taxed. Finally, I think the EU can and should play a role between China and the US in, as was said earlier, we cannot see these two as enemies, but as partners cooperating in this global world.
Thank you, George. And Paul, I think it's your turn. And George, of course, I just want to remind you that you are the second one after Fariz who mentioned the word education. And I hope in the second round, because Fariz says he's coming from educational background, which is as a vice rector of a distinguished university. But I think that you mentioned, I'm very glad that I wasn't pushing in the direction to mention education, but I think we have 4 curves that we want to flatten. First one is epidemic one that we are all trying to flatten somehow. Second one that we are talking about right now is economic curve, that we hit this economic crisis and flatten this curve somehow, all this unemployment, everything goes with it. But the third curve that we have to flatten is educational system that is under severe attack, because all over the world, people do not have distance learning capacities the same way. At the same time, like every crisis, from this crisis, we want to have a new world that is better world to emerge. So as you said, the new normal is not going back to what was normal, because what was normal, we don't consider that was a normal. So that's the reason why I think that economic, and of course the final fourth curve is environmental curve that our discussion should be about as well in sense of sustainability. So those 4 curves that we have to flatten somehow in sense of their disruption, we should not forget education. But of course, Paul, I'm asking you to take the floor and open the last point of the first round of our introductory remarks before Alex joins us.
Well, thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. It's good to be back, and thank you again for inviting me at Nizami Ganjavi, and thank you, Zlatko, for moderating this session. Well, I would like to actually come back a little bit to the institutional aspects of the UN. Why? Because we are, of course, celebrating the 75th anniversary. But you may have seen the latest report from The Economist, which is quite impressive, entitled Unhappy Birthday. So Europe, obviously, but others also need to look at this unhappy birthday and why it is so. Yesterday, listening into Gordon Brown, I noted that he highlighted that the former models of the Washington Consensus didn't solve the crisis, and that nationalism either didn't build a proper response. The walls have been built, and America First sort of is going global. So the only model that works is multilateral cooperation, and this is particularly true during the current pandemic, as we can see with the attacks currently undertaken against WTO, but also the proposals of setting up a global Green New Deal. Now, why? I was wondering, are the responses from weakened UN institutions so? Well, starting with the Secretary General, we noted on March 25th that he launched a humanitarian response plan to mitigate the effects of the global coronavirus crisis. It is quite impressive to see that with a budget of only $2 billion for the UN, the funding is 1/10 of what the US has dedicated to domestic response since early May. So there is quite an impressive discrepancy there. Another institution where I have worked and where I remain close to is the Refugee Agency, UNHCR. It is impressive to see that we are now having 80 million globally displaced persons. This is, as you know, Filippo Grandi's most recent report on displacement. And there are three crises are rolled into one: a health crisis, a socioeconomic crisis, and also a protection crisis. So all these issues, of course, are interlocked. And then we come to another institution of the UN, or related to the UN, the trade aspect. WTO, we all know, is also under heavy pressure. And one area in the trade aspect, which I find quite distressing, is the issue of transparency, which is simply not being tackled correctly. I noted in a recent report that the actual practice of trade transparency is failing. The WTO needs urgently to step up its role in providing transparency of what governments are doing. Their G20 trade ministers said on March 30th that they had started to monitor and to assess the impact of the pandemic on trade. And they stressed the importance of this transparency aspect. But at the same time, only 12 of the 20 G20 members have done so. So there is a lot of discussion, a lot of ideas coming out, but in practice, there is a current shutdown of transparency. And instead of facilitating trade between the member countries, it is actually being impeded. And just to give you one example, 110 WTO members still tax imports of COVID-19 test kits and related apparatus. So this is quite impressive likewise. Last but not least, one of the most important UN institutions, which is obviously the Security Council, is missing in action, as one says. Listening again yesterday to Prince Hassan, in his remarks, quite catchword, he mentioned, the world has gone into lockdown, but the Security Council into deadlock. So all the UN institutions weakened by the member states of the United Nations do not help in finding a proper course of action to address the challenges, whether they be COVID-19, environmental challenges, economic and other important challenges. But it goes beyond the UN. It also concerns groupings such as G7 and G20. It is impressive to note that the leaders of the G7 failed to meet until early March. Even then, they did little more than highlight their respective border closures. So this is quite impressive. And of course, on G20, they also operated on a similar timeline and convening to discuss the pandemic also only in late March, 3 months after the outbreak. So there is an issue of how nations, recognizing obviously the importance of global cooperation, do not in effect work in trying to come up with solutions together. In sum, we have two major actors. One is delinquent, this is Washington, which is chairing currently the G7, and the other is Beijing, which is obfuscating, as we saw when it presided the Security Council in March. So I would like to then, in a second part, if I may, Zlatko, come back to some kind of initiatives that have been launched. I will relate that in the second part of my little comments, and namely refer to the Alliance for Multilateralism, the Franco-German initiative, which has been broadened. But for the time being, this is what I wanted to say at the opening of the discussion. There are sort of two balanced or unbalanced tools. On one side, we have lots of wonderful words, but on the other hand, we have an absence of true and effective mechanisms to address these challenges. Thank you, Zlatko.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, I think you wrap up the first round by basically speaking very clearly, saying that the first round was about identifying issues and saying what are the main challenges and what are the topics that we should consider under such a short period. And the second round should be, just as you said, you already told us nicely that you are going to tell us in the second round what will be your proposals, what are the ways forward, what to do, how to, if the first step is to model the system, how the things work, then we should now see about how to motivate and mobilize people to move, what to do to move, and then what to manage. But to manage something, it should be very important that we move, that we make a move, that we just don't respond on a crisis. So opening the second round, Ehud, I would like to connect with the two major points which I mentioned from you. I mean, to tell us a little bit more about how do you see the perspective and what we can expect from this China-USA, let's say, whatever. I don't want to say game. I don't want to say cooperation. I also want to say confrontation. This China-USA things that are floating around us. So my point would be very simple. I mean, China and USA in reflection of China and USA to the developing countries, especially what we can expect that maybe Beltone Road would play any role. And of course, the European Union as a player in sense of China, USA. So what are the other players that we can expect from China, USA to do, and what we would advise? And in that context, my second question, since you said the global problems have to look for the global solutions, what would be the up to three hints you would give or you would do if you're sitting on Guterres' seat? What would be the three things to move forward? What is our agenda today about sustainable development, sustainable economy? What would be Ehud, Antonio, Guterres, Barak, three moves as SG in context of this issue? So very easy questions, of course.
So I'm afraid, Zlatko, that these kind of issues might need another 1.5 hours round like this one. And in fact, I know Guterres for many years, from the time he was Prime Minister and earlier as a successful engineer. So I believe that I cannot contribute a lot to what the limited things that he can do. And I think that all this rivalry between America and China has so many aspects, from military and struggle in the space, for new technologies to the social differences and the American naive belief that China would somehow see the light in liberal democracy and fall into this trap of open society. I think it goes beyond. I would prefer, with your permission, to make some remarks about education and the new normal that George mentioned. Mm-hmm. So with your permission, let me go into this area. You know, the new normal that George mentioned he's right. It's not going to be the same. And we question the old normal as well, all of us. So I think that what we will see, we'll see certain elements, remnants of the COVID-19, social distancing will be there. Many people will not go back to offices. And many firms found it much more effective to let part of their work being done from home. We will see an emergence of telemedicine on huge scale without human contact, and many other tele kind of activities, and even remote learning, on which I want to make some remarks. The future belongs to new arenas that we didn't see in the past and are penetrating our landscape very effectively and very quickly. Artificial intelligence, deep learning, robotization, the power of new advanced processors, the miniaturization of sensors and processors make it coming very fast into our face in new situations. We're not just people without skills won't find something to do. Many of our educated, skilled labor force won't find employment. In this new world, we will see machines replacing doctors, screening medical imaging, and we'll see more and more robots doing intelligent parts of our activities. And the future belongs clearly to societies which will be very adaptive, very flexible, very open, living naturally with science and technology, and encouraging entrepreneurial spirit. And in this regard, the only way to close gaps, to bring to eliminate backwardness, to bring deprived societies into the front line and into the advanced world, will be through education. Education is also the only weapon to break the burden of all traditional conservative societies, being women in the Islam world, for example. By imposing mandatory high education on all women in a society, you end all these challenge of traditional society, you close the gaps of hundreds of years in one generation. We could see it in Malaysia and other places where women have mandatory high school education. You cannot go backward into this kind of deprivation of half of mankind from its rights and opportunities. But I should tell you that I see probably the greatest opportunity education. In the past, in order to celebrate, you had to go to a very good university to celebrate the achievements of humanity. Very good university, be it in your country, or many of us were sent into the best universities in the world, in the UK or in the United States to enjoy it. Now you can do it from a coffee shop in Bangladesh or from a remote village in Kenya. You can participate in listen to the best teachers on earth. The only thing you should give your youngsters is the control of English and basic mathematics, and the rest of it could be done almost by them. The frontal lectures will disappear. You need the professors to help people or teachers to help the young pupils to solve problems, to train them. But the frontal lectures will be done by the best players on earth. I tell you from personal experience, I found now that I'm retired, my old interest in general relativity, which needs a huge body of mathematics. In fact, it's unbelievable. I don't have to go out from this room and have the best teachers on earth teaching me mathematics, teaching me in great detail general relativity, which I believe is one of the greatest creations of human mind. And the easy access, the simplicity of getting the best at your front desk is something that I think inspiring.
So Ehud, I mean, obviously we are catching up to the same, we are streamlining somehow that this new normal is going to be definitely different than the old normal. And if we can, I can't agree more with you about the importance of education, but also the possibilities that are in front of us. Maybe this COVID crisis actually showed that combination of digitalization and a culture of being connected and culture of using technology showed, basically speaking, that we have chance to be better, because without digital state of digitalization that we have today, our educational system globally would simply collapse. We maybe wouldn't see it the way we see a collapse as a result of epidemics, maybe healthcare system that was under such a big threat. But the educational system showed enormous strength thanks to digitalization. So I think that that's one of the topics, and I'm sure that Fariz was writing something. I saw Fariz was writing, taking some notes when you were speaking about the importance of education. So I would maybe break chain and Fariz ask you to keep up in the spirit of Ehud passion about education, and to say a few words about it before we go back to other issues and other participants. Please, Fariz.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. I absolutely agree with previous speaker. Many keys to today's worlds are in a sphere of education. And as a person who works with young generation, 16, 17-year-old students, I can see that their worldview is so much shaped at university age. And we need to, when we talk about sustainability, environmental problems, protection of nature, protection of our resources, it is really about the lifestyle that we are teaching people. If people are doing overconsumption, if people are not used to how to save, if people are not used to how to preserve energy, water, biodiversity, then of course we will continue having this problem. So at our university, what we do is, in addition to theory and in addition to classes, we put a lot of emphasis on social projects, social responsibility, how to cultivate not only smart specialists, but also cultivate responsible citizens through social projects, through green projects, through conservation projects, through community projects. We believe that people need to be raised at very early age. And as of this year, we also started a secondary school. So we are moving this, philosophy and these ideas into secondary school level, because if we don't change our lifestyle, if we don't change our habits, then this overconsumption will continue and pressure on planet's resources will continue. So I absolutely believe that, question number one or solution number one is to focus on young generation and how we teach young generation about a proper way of life, proper conservation, proper, attitude towards the planet. And secondly, I also absolutely agree about the resources and opportunities that opened up by online education. People in remote areas, people who are in poor families, who cannot pay for college tuition, who cannot pay for expensive lectures. Now, with the help of internet and with the help of this Zoom program or some other programs, are able to connect to best education in the world. And I think this online education is opening so many opportunities, so many new chapters in education sector. We need to embrace it. We need to, involve more and more online courses in our traditional education. We need to also use open sources like Coursera. We need to also pay more attention to opportunities opened up by training programs, such as, in IT field or in other fields, non-traditional training programs, short-term training programs. These are all realities of today's education sector, which can empower young generation, young people, and disempowered people. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Fariz. To wrap up this education issue, I think, George, once in your lifetime, among other things, you used to be education minister. And, so maybe, of course, it was not so long time ago. But you used to be that. And I know that you're very active
a bit younger.
about transformation of education. And maybe there's excellent study published a few days ago by World Economic Forum that put together really excellent think tanks about the future of jobs or jobs of tomorrow. And the major point and major, let's say, focus was made actually on re-engineering or rethinking and reinventing education, especially in the context of new technologies. Maybe there are two key words for that report that are defining the jobs of tomorrow, which is the topic that we are about: sustainable development, economy, and education. Because education is becoming more and more part of economy, of development, and of growth, more than before. And jobs of tomorrow, there are two key words for jobs of tomorrow, and that are putting the, let's say, terms of reference for education. One is digitalization, and another one is human interaction. Human interaction, again, in a context of what is digitalization offering. And there are 7 clusters, not COVID clusters, but 7 clusters that they're identifying. The first one is data and artificial intelligence, and all those education issues and jobs related to that. The second one is engineering and cloud computing. So the first 2 jobs of the future clusters are about what Ehud was talking and what Fariz was mentioning as well. The third one is people and culture. People and culture actually making us closer thanks to digitalization by being physically apart. So the culture that can be what the mission of Nizami Ganjavi is: more dialogue, more tolerance, more learning, and more understanding. The fourth one is actually project development, but the fifth one is marketing and sale, because someone has to do something about it, someone has to pass it to someone else. The sixth one is care economy. Most of you were talking about the new economy that is called care economy, dealing with taking care of other things in health care issues, social issues, and so. And the last one was green energy. So what I'm trying to say is, if we can conclude, wrap up this maybe a little bit, connection between education and economy, before we move to the next round, who's going to pay that? How we will re-engineer international financial institutions to support what we are talking about. So please, George, before we go, if you can just, let's say, wrap up this education issue.
Thank you, Zlatko. You also have been Minister of Education, so you had a very good analysis there. And I can't agree more with Ehud. I myself, Ehud, over these years, I've been able, whether in office or out of office, to listen to the, top theorists on any issue that I wanted to find out. When we had the financial crisis, I could listen to what people were talking about. Not always agreeing, but anyway, it did inform me, and that was quite an experience, and very useful. But I also think that meant that I had the capacity, and I think this is what our schools need, as you have, of course, that we continue to be able to learn and love learning, and really understand that learning is something that really rejuvenates, opens up your mind, gives you new views.
Pilates for the brain.
Yes, that's right. And of course, the idea that through learning you can change the world, I think that goes back even to our ancient civilizations. Ancient Athens, of course, really believed that, yes, we can, move and change things. And therefore, educating your citizen means helping your community change and having the capacity to imagine a different world. But that means our school systems do need to change. They are too much still built on rote learning, on specific types of technical, professional goals. And I think we also can find a way now to think of an education system which will combine the scientific and technical STEM sciences with the wider social and philosophical issues and ethical issues, which we will be dealing with more and more. You talked about quantum physics or artificial intelligence. There are amazing capacities, but huge dilemmas, ethical and value issues of how we use this technology in our societies. I also, and of course, if we gear it to the transformation that we will be facing, whether it's a green transformation or more wellness and so on, I think is going to be of great importance. A second point I want to make on education is that this digitization is a great opportunity, but we also have to somehow politically know where we want to go. I can see the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples, whatever, that they will become the new universities of our, or at least they will partner with the universities, but they may decide on the agenda. We have to make sure that our societies decide on the agenda of where education goes. A third point on education is we need to provide the means. That is what Zlatko said earlier. If we are going to do this, people are going to have to be able to have access to all this great knowledge, this commonwealth, as I would call it. And I would just link this, Zlatko, to your first question. As you said, education, and I think it is crucial for our world. Well, if the UN, if Guterres, I mean, he is in a very difficult situation because it's not what he can do, it's what the member states will allow him to do. And when you have the major powers and I mean, he called for a simple thing, you know, the Security Council to agree on a global truce. That is more symbolic than it could obviously help, but still, they couldn't agree on that, the Security Council, during this COVID-19 pandemic. So he has his difficulties, but I think education might be one point where if he pushed the idea of, okay, how do we educate the world for tomorrow, for these to be resilient to new challenges, to be part of this, you know, participate in an effective way. I would add another two issues that maybe I would see Guterres needing to do. One would be that he looks at the best practices around the world and tries to highlight them and bring them to the global leaders as much as he can. Unluckily, the global leaders can't sit in one room today physically, and it's more difficult to have this sometimes intimate discussion, you know. Ehud, we can talk as we're talking now, but you know, when we get together, you know, we'll shake hands. We should shake hands. We don't do it anymore. We can have more informal relations, which are needed, I think, in this global world, to try to keep the tensions as much as possible low. The second, I think, is to look at projects that exist around the world and highlight them and see how they can be used. You mentioned, some mentioned the Beltone Road. Well, could not the Beltone Road be a major health project, for example, where not just a infrastructure project, where you see the European Union, the wider neighborhood, of course, and China working together in areas like in Africa and so on, but putting as a goal how we deal with, you know, build up our health systems and so on. These might be ways to create new thinking and cooperation where the UN could play an important role. And if things like that, these types of projects are seen in that way, you could bring in all types of partners and hopefully the US too. So I think that it's a very difficult situation. Education is key because that is what is going to give the capacity for our societies, not only for work, but also for as a collectively be able to deal with resilience. One more point just to think of, because I think, Ehud, as you said, a lot of jobs will be lost. We'll have to think of new types of jobs, and people are talking about soft skills and social skills and so on. But I also think that if we move into robotics and artificial intelligence and so on, they will be the slaves of the past, of the future, let's put it that way. In ancient Greece, unluckily, well, but on the one hand, they had a lot of free time, the citizens of Athens, because they had people working for them, usually slaves. Some of them were migrants also. Well, we don't want slavery, but if we do have machines to play that role, we will free our time. And then the type of work we have may be much more creative, maybe much more philosophical, maybe much more, we have time to talk about these issues and not run around, you know, and so on. But that also means a very different economic system, which allows maybe basic incomes, guarantees basic incomes, basic sort of dignified life without having to, you know, work 16 hours a day, or, you know, be tense, all under this tense pressure always to produce. But so these are some big major issues I think we have to think about, which will of course be affecting the education system. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Chiril, since you are coming from the Belt and Road path country, you are actually, and we had, I mean, already mentioning issues that are related to the developing countries, and especially the countries that are on a Belt and Road path. I think it would be good to hear your reflection of what could be the major challenges and what would be suggestions for developing countries like your country is. And I'm sure that Paul will connect on that. And of course, Nathalie, I'm waiting for you to give us some words about your thoughts about people and culture, connecting these two things. I mean, especially having in mind the name of your foundation. But we'll get to that as well. So, Chiril, could you take a screen?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Zlatko. I think we mentioned a couple of very important words during our conversation, and all these words are, if you look at them separate, they have a meaning, but under the umbrella of economy, I think they are the key to support the economy. So we mentioned about care, we mentioned about sustainability, we mentioned about education, which is very important, and we mentioned about connectivity at the end of the day. All over this, I think there was a statement that we have to think local, but we have to act and to be global. For none of the governments of any country, this period is easy. I don't think there are correct or incorrect actions within this situation when you don't have a clear analysis, when you don't have a feasibility or a clear picture of what is happening. It's most of the things are learned on the way, like you learn as you do. So the focus area, in my opinion, for every single country is, first of all, health, economy, and education. All of this should be integrated and should be in the process of digitalization, as we were mentioning before. We have to be ready to adapt ourselves to all these changes, and I think Fariz mentioned about that we have to change. There is not a other way, unless we don't want to sit and just go ourselves down or put ourselves down. Evaluate, or let's say in a different way, we should re-evaluate our values and the criteria. We have to admit that we, in some of the cases, we are the causes of this environmental, let's say, problems that we are facing at the end of the day. We have to take clear actions and clear, small but important steps within this direction. The future belongs, or the future depends on these small steps we are going to take today, I would say. The changes are fast. We have to adapt ourselves to these fast changes, and we have to be in a continuous learning process. During this COVID time, we saw that learning online, education online is possible, even though we were, I have my kids, I was trying to be close to them every single day when they were getting connected to their teacher and so on. But now they are teaching me how to do these things. So I'm happy that they are adjusting themselves, and they are very, the young generation is very easy to adapt to the changes. In the same time, the professions of today may not be the professions of tomorrow. It may be the case that during one lifetime, we will have to learn a couple of professions because the previous profession which I learned is not valid anymore, is not in use anymore. And that's I think something, I see it positive. I see it that we, in a way, widen our, or make our life bigger, or make our life to cover much more things.
Thank you, Chiril.
There is not, I will finalize with these things. I think there is not, we are not ready for the future, but like I said, everything depends on the steps and the decisions we are taking today. And of course, if you look at the companies or on the economical side, there may be situation that some big companies, some small companies will suffer and they will close. They will get closed, they will get bankrupt in the bankruptcy process. Many people will lose their jobs, and it will not be simple to find new jobs unless you don't change. And again, we are coming that within these conditions, we have to adapt ourselves, we have to change ourselves, and we have to be ready. And Excellencies, I think it was a point within our communication where I felt like we are moving from talks and discussions about economy to the discussions about education. And I think that's the key, and that's very important. I think that education should be in line with the economy, and they should get connected and they should support each other. Otherwise, it will be harder and more complicated.
Thank you, Chiril. Thank you. Nathalie, before I call you and Paul, I would just, since Ehud, I want to thank you, I mean, for really being with us longer than you had the time, and I really appreciate it. And since you logged in first, I would ask you just before you leave, and thank you for additional minutes that you stayed in here. It would be good, I mean, to have your thoughts about, we had some common letters that we sent as Nizami, Ganjavi. We grouped ourselves, we had a lot of initiatives, especially the ones that Gordon Brown and Helen Clark were leading with especially the messages to international financial institutions, to G20, to G7, and so on. So, for May Day parade, we have International Labour Organization that told us that out of 3.1 trillion jobs, 1.5 trillion jobs are now jeopardized in very moment as a result of COVID and as a result of the things that we talked about, modernization, automatization. So if you could share some thoughts, please, about financial institutions, international financial institutions, what are the things that we should press them to and what we should do in that context? Can we somehow maybe do additional efforts to find additional funding for the things that we're talking about?
No, I think that the very activity, the fact that we, as many of us are former kind of leaders, former national leaders, former leading ministers, it's important that we will keep raising our voice and calling, and in this regard, I think a lot of credit the Nizami, Ganjavi, and Rovshan deserve from all of us. Very important to raise our voice, but we should be very realistic. I think that George mentioned earlier the constraints on Guterres. He can recommend to the players to do the thing, cannot replace them. We should be realistic. It's important voice, it's important morally, it's important for the kind of advice of elderly people, and it's good for the showing our own publics and the citizens of the world that that we still care about them. But in reality, I think that the conflicting interests and challenges are there for the present leader. So I put a lot of weight on our informal relationship with present leaders. When behind closed doors, you sometimes can talk to them much more bluntly and effectively than you can do over, thousands of people listening. So it's important. But I think that the real realization of the need to act will come from within our own society or from external disasters. The coronavirus, if it will keep to stay with us with no vaccine and post-corona impact, which are sometimes tragic for people who were contracted, it will be a great kind of red light or a wake-up call for leaders. You can see what happens in America now. It has other roots as well, but it's impressive kind of rising up of voices from within the people. And similar things when I watch the demonstration in Hong Kong or some other events around the world, you see that either from internal energy, the simmering under the surface and erupts under with some iskra, some ignition kind of sort of ignition. And the same applies from external threats. So we should be realistic. We will learn the hard way through hitting the wall internally, domestically, politically, or hitting the wall as a global community. I hope that we will wake up at the right time, not too late, to save humanity based on this understanding that global challenges should take over local politics, populism, fake news, whatever you. My deepest observation is that all this new agenda of fake news, post-truth, alternative facts, these is elements which are part of human needs or nature. They work very well in marketing, in branding, in entertainment, in reality TV, in politics. It doesn't work in whatever we achieved as mankind. When you think of Plato or Socrates or Einstein or Steve Jobs, you know, the real achievements from structural engineering to science to spatial operation to space missions, whatever made us this exceptionally advanced humanity has all to do with truth, with science, with common sense. And I can just quote the recent joke that common sense met COVID-19 and went into 2 years of isolation. I hope it will be shorter.
Okay, thank you, Ehud. I mean, you just closed your loop by how you started it. Global challenges need global solutions, and for that we have to share the philosophy or shared society, shared future, shared leadership. And golden word share is obviously something which we need more than we were witnessing before. So Nathalie, please, would you take the floor from your Societer perspective?
Sure. Well,
for having me in. I have to leave. I'm really sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Ehud. All the best. All the best, Ehud.
Okay. Yeah, so I will try to be short because I can see we're running a bit out of time. Just Zlatko, to come back to your previous comment on the European Green New Deal and on the inclusion of all of the states, especially Balkan states. I was reading the last day, the statement by Ursula von der Leyen, as you know, is the president of the European Union, that there's a now emphasis for the EU new diplomatic targets, sort of, with Balkan states and with African states. So it's interesting. Obviously the European Union needs to as well reinvent itself with the global challenges we've been facing. Not only the United Nations, but I think also the European Union is facing some global challenges. And so we're trying to find our new place within this new global order with China on the side and the United States on the other side. And so I find it very interesting, as a French citizen and as a European citizen, that those new diplomatic targets are stated. So Balkan on the side and African state on the other side. So that's, I guess, is our new partners to work on this Green New Deal. And so to wrap up maybe on the economic issues, which is the theme of today's session. As I said, I think we need to learn how to be both local and global, because we've seen that this crisis, has accelerated the economic transformation. So on one part of the value chain, you have, companies with a better proximity and, asking for, localization of the workforce and asking to be more local, because as well as the citizens in the countries are asking to have their workforce in their country. We've seen the problems of producing, and having importation during the COVID crisis. It was a bit of an issue. So it needs to be local, but obviously it needs to be global. So, always saying and advocating for new coalitions, but really, as a businesswoman, I can truly see the value of public-private partnerships. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half, and we mentioned many times Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, the Facebook, and the new big corporations that are shaping our world today. So in a way, we need to be careful that these private companies are not going to shape our social and political agenda, but we cannot do anything without them right now. So really, yeah, I think this COVID crisis accelerating two big tendencies. There's a local one, with value chains and localization of the workforce within region, within countries. So on one hand, and second hand, the big global public-private partnerships with large corporations such as Facebook or Google, working with states to improve artificial intelligence subjects, climate change, and all the new initiatives that we need to face as a whole. Because as a human species, we can only win when we collaborate. At the end, if we all fight each other, it won't work. We've seen that with evolution. So states, regions, and corporations. That's, I think, the good answer.
Thank you, Nathalie. Now, Paul, I think you should use your trilateral mindset to somehow give us some thoughts about what to do now, and especially what to do next, to have the next new normal being really better and especially normal.
Thank you, Zlatko, but let's remain modest. First of all, I'd just like to come back to what I wanted to say in the second part in 2 seconds, talking about the Alliance for Multilateralism. I think this Franco-German initiative is important. Unfortunately, it's not well known. They did issue, and you can read their latest declaration on April 16th, an important communication on linked to COVID-19, obviously, on the health, the financial, the information, the prevention, and the economic challenges. I won't go through the list in detail, so do have a look, because I think it is important at times when multilateralism is being so heavily attacked and battered from all quarters, starting by Washington, but also indirectly also by Beijing. My second point was linked to your proposal that we also see a little bit what's happening on the China-US front, and where does Europe fit in? You mentioned BRI, the Beltone Road initiative. All I can see is that since its launch, when was that, 3 or 4 years ago, it has since been heavily criticized by many quarters, including in Africa, as being a sort of a neo-mercantilist type of project. Europe had not even responded until very recently. Where did it fit in? I mean, the European response was very weak, but now it has a strong response. I must say President Macron was heavily involved in giving out a strong response to BRI. So where does Europe fit into this new context of two bipolar worlds in the making? Are we going to see a real geopolitical commission? As Ursula von der Leyen mentioned at the opening of her new position as president of the Commission, we would hope so. But my concern is that the European project itself is really today under very, difficult times. This is my greatest worry, that there is a closing sort of minds and of borders, and this is very effectively seen today with the COVID crisis, and that is the European project to still have steam. I would obviously hope so. I still believe, I know in my country, in France, there are a lot who are questioning this European project, but this is one of the greatest adventures we've witnessed since the end of the war. And so I would hope that when we come up with, policies, that the citizenship in all our member countries is more closely involved, that it's not just a top-down affair, that we have to take into account growing nationalism, xenophobia, we witnessed during the latest and the very recent migration crisis. So all these issues come back together to try and find a new toolbox and find a new way of explaining that it's not by simply closing borders that we're going to protect ourselves, and that we need to find maybe new tools. And of course, their education was very interestingly and forcefully put forward, but this is also in healthcare, this is also in other domains. One last point. You may have seen on the Commission side the attacks against the European Commission, that they had not sufficiently, protected the European citizenship against COVID-19. But the mere fact is that this is a member state competence. It's not a European Commission competence. So there again, there's a lot of, well, let's say misinformation. I don't want to be nasty, it's not just disinformation, but I think we all need to be better informed on who does what, under which conditions, and where we can move forward, hopefully in a multilateral approach, in a multilateral philosophy that I think Europe is the standard bearer on the international scene. So my comments are very general, Zlatko, but I think we need to again see the holistic approach to all these important technical details that need to be sort of written up. Thank you, Zlatko.
Well, I think, Paul, you've made an excellent point about lack of global leadership, and I think that George has an excellent point on about the need for leadership of mind, like people, individuals, entities, organizations, NGOs. We have to make some kind of, in a sense of lack of global leadership, the people who are paid for being global leaders, that we should think about making some kind of alliance of like-minded entities, people, and that's what NGIC mission is about. So George, since you are having, there's one thing that cannot wait, it's COVID-19. And so you just told us, I mean, privately, that you are now going in line with other Greek parliamentarians to take COVID tests. That's something which will make us also to wrap up this overall gathering. So if you would like to say a few words about it before you take a test, and good luck for that. And Roshan, be ready to take final words, please, before we wrap up everything. So George?
Well, thank you, of course, Roshan. I wrote some things in the chat because that's one way to not to inundate you with my talk, but my ideas. But yes, I have to go to the parliament. We actually have, we initially had COVID-19 tests in the parliament, but now we're being tested for antibodies to see if we have possibly contracted, and that might be good to have the antibodies, but I don't think I have contracted it. I most likely would have felt it. But it's an exercise which is important, and I think this is going to be unluckily part of our lives in the near future at least. but I want to agree with what Paul was saying. Europe can be a model. It is being undermined by what's happening around the world because of this nationalism, xenophobia, and so on. So it's actually, Europe has its founding idea is that, you know, we can work together, different nations and ethnicities, on some basic principles. So if that idea is undermined globally, it will of course undermine Europe, unless we really fight for it in Europe and of course around the world. But as multilateralism is also being attacked, and the leadership in the globe is lacking, the US was playing a leadership role, for better or for worse. But now we see this conflict between the US and China, but also the type of leadership that the Trump administration is, or the lack of leadership, if you like, the destructive type of leadership that they are showing, makes it the multilateral institutions much weaker. We do need to reform them, we need to strengthen them, but until that happens, hopefully sooner than later, but we may be able to think of something like an alliance of the like-minded, those who do believe that things need to change. You mentioned the French-German proposal, but we could think of other states, Europe, of course, and around the world, our neighborhood, those that can think about, well, we've done it in Europe and different things. The Schengen cooperation, the Euro is basically an alliance of certain countries that say, we want to move forward in cooperation in certain areas. But this could include not only states, NGOs, cities, personalities, you know, like the ones that are participating here in the Nizami cooperation and conference, that can actually push an agenda, implement an agenda beyond xenophobia and nationalism, which you mentioned, Paul. That's just what I would like to think of as a concrete idea. And maybe just one for the WHO, that would be, if we can strengthen the WHO, they need to have, in a positive way, an interventionist capacity. If there's something around the world, they should be able to get there immediately, sort of an army of doctors and so on. They don't have that capacity today. They're more advisory. But anyway, that's a second issue. But I think we have to think about new alliances in this complex world. Thank you. I'm sorry I'll have to leave. Thank you very much. It was great to have this conversation.
Thank you, George. Thank you to everyone. We are wrapping up anyway because we have to get ready for final panel. So Roshan, could you just take the floor? And I want to thank you personally. I mean, because you are, I mean, it looks like you are making a small online Baku forum. I mean, because these 2-3 days were so packed, so content packed. And I really want to thank you for having such a, not only creativity, but also creative energy. And it's not about how many ideas you have, it's about how many ideas you make alive. So obviously your ideas are becoming alive when you stick to them and you take a passionate energy for it. So Roshan, could you just give us a few words and then we could start preparing for the final session that starts in a little bit over 2 hours.
Thank you, Zlatko, for sharing this session. I mean, like everything being done thanks to the Secretariat and small team and to the board members and to the dedication of everyone. As we've been discussing, like during this 3-day conference, the most important point was every voice matters. And former leaders, especially, they have an active, important position. They can raise their voices and to make a solidarity. Like last time, Gordon Brown mentioned, every letter, every statement that we are preparing, no matter 100% will not be listening to that, but 2-3 persons going to listen to that. And that's why it's very important, and especially when you are going to live connection. And I think that it's very important for the young people and for the ordinary people who can watch this to be able to get a different perspective of information, because not only from media or from the information, but from the leaders that they can trust. And we will be shortly having in 2 hours our closing ceremony session, which will be 4 p.m. I think the Central European time, and hope you will be watching that also.
Okay, by having Roshan saying this, I want to Paul, Fariz, Chiril, and of course Nathalie, to you. And as I thanked our previous speakers, Ehud and George, I want to thank you all and keep close, socially closer to your friends, to your dear ones, and of course keep physically distant until this, as Ehud said, COVID and common sense sort out the issue of pandemic this time. So thank you, and all the best. To you, and we are logging out, right? So have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Zlatko.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zlatko.
Thanks. Bye.